before we look into like which decks and what players I think are going to win, I think what we need to do is we need to take a little bit of a look at the format as a whole, of course, because the World Championship format, which is something that not everyone is familiar with, the World Championship format in Yu-Gi-Oh! Works a little bit differently for both TCG and Master Duel, actually. So let's start by talking about how the TCG/OCG World Championship works. Because of course, as you all know, the OCG and the TCG are operating on different schedules and different ban lists. How do they combine both of those formats into a World Championship format? And the answer is, I think, both kind of surprising, but also kind of simple. They just combine the two by slapping the two ban lists together and also the two card pools. Like, you know, the way this works is essentially a card at the World Championship is at the lowest it's in any of the formats. What that means is if a card is banned in the TCG, but legal in the OCG, it is banned at Worlds. If a card is limited in the TCG, but semi-limited in the OCG, the lowest of the two is the limited in the TCG, so it'll be at 1. The same goes for cards that are not released in one of the two regions. Any card that is not released in both the TCG and the OCG is not allowed at Worlds. So it's called an intersection. Yep, I think that's the right word for it. I couldn't think of the right word, but yeah, I think intersection is the right word. So if, for example, I don't know, I'm looking at the list here on my screen, but like, for example, the RB cards. The RB cards are not out in the OCG yet, so they are not allowed to be played at the World Championship. Same is true for Beyond the Brave, which is a set that's already out in the OCG, but not in the TCG yet. So at Worlds, they cannot play Beyond the Brave yet. So it is an intersection of the two formats and the two ban lists. So before we even look into the decks, let's take a quick look at the ban list for the World Championship and just maybe talk about which cards make an interesting difference between the two formats, because they are not at the same. So of course here, it's a much bigger ban list than usual because all of these cards on the first page are all the TCG exclusives that are not out in the OCG yet, like Yugioh the Dawn's Light or Loose the Dusk's Dark are apparently not out in the OCG yet. Ashland U1000, a lot of these cards, the RB cards, like I said, GMX is not legal, rip my goats, and then also Pumpkin cards, the Bones cards. Not that anyone would have played these, but just so we understand how it works. Mixuzia the Confounder is one of the first cards that we need to keep in mind. This is an important card if we look at something like Branded, if we look at something like Invoke, that was definitely a card that mattered. Another card that matters is Shade the Obscure, Fata Dragna maybe. There's a couple of cards that could have made a small impact at the World Championship. I think the biggest one of these is definitely Mixuzia though. Angeliki is also not out, which is an engine that was experimented with a little bit at in different decks in the TCG, not an option at World, so we won't be seeing any of that. But now we get into the part where I think it gets really, really interesting, which is the actual ban list, right? Past all of the exclusive cards is where we start combining the two forbidden and limited lists. And this leads to a couple of interesting changes to the format, making it so it's neither TCG nor OCG, but something in the middle. As an example, for us TCG players, a couple of cards that are not available in the World Championship format, Kashtira Fenrir is banned in the OCG, believe it or not. They think that Kashtira Fenrir is a bigger problem than Max C. So Kashtira Fenrir is banned, which that makes sense, OCG. Anyways, Fenrir is banned, but also vice versa for the OCG players, Max C is banned because it's banned in the TCG, so we don't have Max C. That matters a lot. Another card that is also a big game changer for the OCG players is Baron the Fleur. In the OCG right now, Baron the Fleur is one of the most important cards in something like Elf Notes, but it's not available at the World Championship. Other cards that matter a lot here. Called by the Grave. This is the first big TCGL. This card is still allowed in the TCG, but the OCG has actually banned it, which is awesome. So we are going to see no Called by the Graves at the World Championship because it's banned in the OCG. That is the The one thing that the OCG has over the TCG, I keep saying that, is some of their non-engine hits, which I guess I'll cover this now, but Ash Blossom and Joyous Spring as well is going to be semi-limited at the World Championship because it is semi-limited over in the OCG, together with a card like Dominus Impulse as well. So they do have some more significant hits to non-engine in the OCG. Super Polymerization as well, a card that is super good in something like Branded, which is going to be a deck that's relevant for Worlds, but Super Poly only at 2 copies, together with a limited Droll and Lockbird, because that is also limited in the OCG. So those are basically the biggest changes, I think, that are coming from the OCG, is that we have no Called By, 1 Droll, 2 Ash Blossoms, and only 2 Impulse. So significantly less hand traps in general, but also just less ways to negate hand traps from your opponent as well, because, you know, Ash on the Molcharmi, Called By on any hand trap. We're going to see less of that at Worlds, which I think is wonderful. I'm looking forward to that a lot. That is a thing that I'm really jealous of the OCG for when it comes to the format. So yeah. Other than that, I think those are the biggest changes, but there are a couple of things that are also hit quite significantly, like Fiendsmith as an engine has been hit differently in the OCG than the TCG, which sometimes that happens where the TCG hits one card and then the OCG hits a different card at Worlds. That means both of those cards are hit. I think this is the same with the Malice Link monsters. Like in the TCG, they banned Whitebinder. In the OCG, they banned Red Ransom. And at Worlds, that means both are banned. which is, I mean, I'm not complaining about that. But yeah. Mitsurugi is another deck that gets hit significantly from this, because in the OCG, they've chosen to limit Mitsurugi Prayers. And in the TCG, they've chosen to limit Mitsurugi Habakiri. At Worlds, both of those are at 1, which is something that is going to hurt. I still think there is a chance that we are getting to see some Mitsurugi, and I'll talk about that later. Pre-prep is also at 1. But we will look at a deck in a second that I think could have a chance of still featuring Mitsurugi cards at Worlds. And I also have an idea of who could be playing it. I'll tell you that in a second. Duelists, I get asked very frequently what kind of oversleeves I use to protect my inner sleeves, because of course, if you use OCG sleeves or any other fancy kind of sleeves, you want to make sure they don't get damaged, and so you want to use oversleeves. And Ice Oversleeves is a sponsor of the channel, and I've been testing them for weeks now to make sure that they're good, because I didn't want to accept any sponsor that I wasn't convinced of. So I've been trying these for a while now, and I'm very happy to recommend them to you guys as a sponsor of the channel. You can use code Josh5 to get 5% off of your order. They, at the moment, only ship within Europe. If that is ever changing, I will let you know. But for everyone from Europe who's interested and wants to try some Ice Oversleeves, I heavily recommend it. Link is in the description down below. Let's continue with the video. Skrelp actually sent me a link right now of the most important hits narrowed down, so we don't have to scroll through the full thing. So that is wonderful. Thank you for that. Let me go to the other side so you can read all of it. All right, engine bans, Obedience, Schooled, Malice, Red Ransom, Substitute. This is the differences to the TCG ban list, right? This is what we don't have in the TCG, but we have it in Worlds, right? So non-engine bans, Called by the Grave, Geonator, Transverser because of the FTKs, Fenrir. Baguska is banned as well. That is very, very cool to not have Baguska in the format. I don't know what deck would be making Baguska. Maybe something like Lunalight, which is technically still available in the format. So no Baguska. Premature Burial and Divine Sword are kind of whatever. Some FTK enablers are here, like all the Cannon Soldiers and stuff like that, which, yeah, I guess good riddance. Not that anyone would have played that, but just in case, I think that's good. All right, for engine, compared to the TCG, Rotary is already limited in the OCG. So Rotary is a pretty significant hit to Cool Tune, and it also means that the deck at the moment, because of how the World Championship rules work, you cannot make use of the new Blue Eyes Overframe in Master Duel, because at the World Championship, because that card is used in the OCG right now. We can take a look at an OCG Cool Tune list in a second. to replace the extra copies of Rotary, because with the second wave of Grandmaster rares, they made a replacement or like a searcher for level 1 light tuners, and that includes Rotary, of course. So that's one thing that they are using in the OCG right now to have more consistent access to Rotary, and we can't do that at Worlds. At Worlds, Rotary is truly limited, and there's no like ways of just immediately searching it unless you're getting really fancy with it, like Sage with Eyes of Blue or something like that. Also, Cool Tune Synchro is semi-limited, so that is what is hit for Cool Tune. Like I said, Pre-Prep, Mitsurugi Prayers, Eyes Ryziel, all limited. Pretty big hits to Mitsurugi / Ryziel Mitsurugi, Sword Ryziel as well. Wanted is limited, which is another hit to those Dia Bellstar piles. Raisin, Marshmallow, Fiendsmith Engine is significantly hit. March Hare is limited. Poplar, Ash are still limited in the OCG. Pearl Rhino is limited. Not that that really matters, honestly. Those like Runic Fountain, let's go. Runic Fountain is limited. Thank God we're saved from the horrors that would have happened otherwise if that card was not at 1. Yeah, well, yeah, anyways. And those are basically, those are the changes that we're working with when we're going into the World Championship. Of course, I've already talked about here the big bonus that the OCG is giving us, I think, is in the non-engine section. I think this is where it matters the most. Like Called by the Grave Band, Droll Limited, Ash Semi, Impulse Semi, Super Poly Semi. I'm really excited about less non-engine. Also, thank God SP Little Knight is limited. I don't know, the World Championship would probably be so awful to watch if this card was not at 1 in the OCG. They really outdid themselves there with that hit. That was phenomenal. Yeah, very good limit OCG. That together with Cupsy Yamiway both being at 1, because that's where the TCG side is also like putting in the effort, right? Because the OCG gives us 1 SP, the TCG gives us 1 Cupsy Yamiway. Together, I feel like that means there will just simply be no toxic gameplay at the World Championship, because those 2 hits combined are so good that, like, I mean, what can people even do at that point? What can people even do at that point with such a meaningful change to the format? I mean, it's going to be a completely different game at this point. Okay. That being said, we also have this in picture form here, but we just went over it. So let's think about it from the TCG perspective. From the TCG perspective, I've just opened up some of the most recent tournaments that we had, the bigger ones, the European Championship, the North American Championship, as well as YCS Montreal. What kind of decks do we expect to see at the World Championship when it comes to the TCG format? Let's look at Cool Tune, which was the winning deck at the EUWCQ, and let's talk about how significantly this deck is hit and whether it'll still see some play at the World Championship. Now, Rotary going from 3 to 1 is definitely a meaningful hit to Cool Tune. It does make the deck significantly weaker to mainly just interactions, because the deck is still almost the same level of consistent, I think. I mean, you lose 1 copy of Cool Tune Synchro, but Rotary itself was not really, it wasn't the starter, right? I mean, Rotary together with level 3 hand trap, you could play with it, but the 1-card starters are all still here, right? Like, we still have the Qs, the Ricos, the Mixes, and we could even increase the consistency more. You can play Reinforcement of the Army to find Mix, you can play Earthbound Immortal Stone Sweeper to find Rico, you can play Sage with Eyes of Blue to find Rotary if you really want to. You can play more copies of Duelist Genesis to have better ways to extend. But there's a few big things about Rotary. Having a hard-drawn Rotary in hand makes it so you basically beat every single hand trap in the game, pretty much. Like, if your opponent goes Rotary, reveal Rico, you already know you're not stopping that, really. And there's no amount of imperms or ashes or bells or whatever you can have at this point to cut the opponent off of the Cool Tune engine. And that is just something that is going to be happening at Worlds, I believe, is I think Cool Tune is going to be a lot less resilient. The deck is still good. Absolutely, I think. I think we are going to see some players play Cool Tune, mainly because it is the best deck utilizing all of these hand traps. So if some players test the format and they reach the conclusion that they want to play a hand trap deck, I think Cool Tune is definitely up there. I think it's probably the best deck if you want to play a hand trap style, right? But it will be more, I think the mirror match especially is going to be a lot more volatile with one copy of Rotary, because sometimes you just go first now, you don't have Rotary in hand, you go normal summon Rico, it gets hand trapped, and then it's kind of like, okay, well, I'm just gonna have to pass here. I think we're gonna see that in specifically the Cool Tune mirror match. In other matchups, I think it's probably fine, because they play less of these kind of like Bell, Valor type hand traps. But we'll see how players adapt. Maybe you can play additional extenders, like in more copies of Duelist Genesis or something like that, also to make up for the loss of a Cool Tune Synchro. Cards like Overtuning as well is something that you can do. Pot of Desires is a card that you probably see less often at the World Championship, because with one copy of Rotary and 2 copies of Cool Tune Synchro, I think that card is just, frankly, not an option, because banishing 1 or 2 copies of Cool Tune Synchro or the Rotary can be absolutely game losing right from the start. So I think we would expect people to not play Pot of Desires in this deck. But it definitely still is an option for the format, and I think it's a viable one at that, depending on what you predict the format to be. Because some of the other decks that we might be seeing, I think, are pretty good against Cool Tune. So it's going to be scary for players to pick Cool Tune for Worlds, because there's a couple of decks in the format that I think have a pretty good matchup into it, but we will talk about those in a moment. Yeah, okay, so that is Cool Tune. I think absolutely still viable, but I don't know if it's still a top tier strategy. Oh, by the way I wanted to do this for the World Championship is I wanted to just make some predictions here, get flashbanged by the Google Sheet. I want to predict my top 4 players and my top 4 decks. I know people have been doing like rankings of all the players at the World Championship. I personally don't feel comfortable doing that, because I just it's not my type of thing to like rate, or I think this is the worst player in the tournament or something like that. I just don't think that's a nice thing to do. So instead, I'll just pick my favorites and then move on. I think that gives you the same amount of like benefit. I don't see a reason to go to like say, okay, these are my least favorite players in the event. I don't really want to do that. So for both tournaments, we're just going to pick my top 4. I'm just going to pick my top 4 players in TCG, OCG, and my top 4 teams in Master Duel, and I think that is sufficient. Yeah, and then for TCG, I want to predict my top 4 decks. Do I think Cool Tune is in the top 4 of decks in the World Championship? I think it's close. I think it depends a little bit on the rest of the format, and I want to talk through the rest of the format before I reach a conclusion on that. But the way it's in my mind right now, I feel like Cool Tune is more like the 3rd or 4th best, maybe. But we'll talk about that in a second. Other decks worth talking about. Mitsurugi. Pure Mitsurugi, I think, is not going to see play at the World Championship. Quite frankly, because I think 1 Habakiri, 1 Prayers is not enough to justify playing Pure Mitsurugi. Also, losing 2 copies of pre-prep makes it so that the deck is just vastly inconsistent. You have to make up for the consistency in Mitsurugi by adding in other engines, I think. I think Pure Mitsu will just not be there. So, yeah. The thing is, I think we will see Mitsurugi at Worlds, just not in its pure form. And I'll get to that in a second, which deck I think we could see with Mitsurugi cards. But this deck itself, I don't think we are going to see. Even though, of course, 2nd place at the European Championship did qualify with Mitsurugi. And often, that's another thing to keep in mind. A lot of people, when they qualify for the World Championship, have the tendency to prefer the deck that they qualified with. But that's not always the case, and I think in the case of Mitsurugi, I think we're not going to see it. Here's another deck that I am definitely going to rank in my top 4 contenders for the World Championship, and that is Branded. Branded, I think, has a great time at the World Championships because of a couple of factors. First, it's basically unhit. You lose a Super Poly, and you lose Mixuzia the Confounder. Those are the 2 cards that you lose in Branded pretty much, but that's it. Besides non-engine changes to this list in particular, of course, like Droll and Lockbirds or Called by the Grave, obviously, but that applies to all of the decks. I think Branded benefits off of the fact that Molcharmies are resolving more often in this format. That is something that is absolutely the case, of course, because Called by the Grave is banned and Ash Blossom is semi-limited, that means Molcharmies are going to resolve more often. And this is one of the biggest things at the World Championship. With Molcharmies resolving more often, you will have a bigger reason to not play a super high ceiling combo deck. You would be better off playing a deck that has a solid compromise into the Molcharmies. And I think Branded is one of the better decks when it comes to these kind of dynamics, when it comes to like just activating a Charmy and then playing well into a half board. I think Branded is a phenomenal deck for doing that. And so Branded, I think, is one of the decks that benefits the most from the fact that the OCG non-engine is reduced, and from the TCG side, also the level of FTKs that people can do is reduced because we don't have Baron and so on and so forth. So I think Branded is a phenomenal pick, and it's going to be one of the decks that I'm absolutely going to rank into my top 4 decks for the World Championship. I don't know if it's the best deck. And the reason why I don't know if it's the best deck is because there is a pretty significant counter to it in Rolad. I think Rolad is a phenomenal deck at the World Championship this year, and I think some version of Rolad is not unlikely to win the whole thing. Whether that is a super low to the ground Rolad Branded like the one that I played at the European Championship, or whether it's going to be a more combo heavy version like the Rolad Azamina, or something like the crazy 60 card Rolad piles. Like here's the thing, Rolad is a spectrum that ranges from super low ceiling to super high ceiling. And this is something that I find hard to predict exactly where on that spectrum players are going to land at the World Championships, because on the one hand, the higher ceiling means that you are going to be winning more going first. And I think that is something I want to point out when it comes to lower ceiling decks. And this is something, of course, we've gone over this in the discussion with Anthony Zhu as well when we discussed the whole like mid-range combo thing. If you play a super low ceiling deck like this one, and your opponent chooses a higher ceiling deck, like a 60 card Rolad Mitsurugi, whatever, if you go first and your opponent plays perfectly, they are very likely to beat you. And that is one of the things that is the most scary, I think, with playing a deck like this at the World Championships in particular. Because if you bring a deck like this to locals, regionals, or even YCSs to an extent, you can expect some of your opponents to make mistakes. You can expect some of your opponents to not play perfectly into your board, and these decks can really exploit that super well. Like if your opponent fumbles an OTK against a deck like this, you can really punish that very well. If your opponent plays perfectly and just dissects your board and goes for game and doesn't make a mistake, then you can get punished really hard for picking a deck like this, because it doesn't have the most amount of interruptions, and that means your opponent will get to play the game relatively freely, and that means that you are kind of like at the mercy of your opponent playing well or making some mistakes could mean the outcome of the game, right? And this is something at the World Championship I would not rely on my opponents making mistakes when they play into my board. If my opponent plays a super high ceiling, let's even use the one from YCS Montreal, right? If my opponent plays a deck like this at the World Championships, and I go first with this, I would not feel confident that my board is going to hold against a super strong player. So I actually think there is a realistic chance that people are going to just be too scared to play pure Rolad, or it's not even pure Rolad, but like a low ceiling Rolad version, if this is something like this is to be expected. And so here's the question: is something like this to be expected? Because of course this deck in its entire form is also not legal, right? There's 3 copies of Wanted, which is going to be limited at the World Championships. There's 3 copies of Prayers, which is going to be limited at the World Championships. And there are 2 copies of Pre-Prep, which is limited at the World Championships. Here's the thing. I saw a list, a version of this deck that was almost entirely legal do well at a regional here. 60 card Horus Azamina Adventure Mitsurugi Light and Darkness Ritual. This deck is entirely legal for Worlds because it plays 1 pre-prep and 1 prayers. And 1 wanted. So this is a completely legal deck at the World Championship you're looking at. And also it doesn't play Called by the Grave, and it only plays 1 Drone Lockbird. I think the fact that this deck is built this way is not a coincidence, because this deck was built by Andres Torres, who is at the World Championship. So, you know, there's a realist. I don't know. This could be something to throw off the competition. I have no idea. Something like, oh, I'll just play this deck and maybe people think that's what I'm going to be playing at Worlds, but then I end up playing something completely different. Because I'm going to be real with you. When I saw Andres Torres made it to the World Championships, I thought he was going to play Branded. I think Andres Torres, like, not playing Branded in this format, I would not. I think there's a very realistic chance that Andres Torres still goes with Branded. Absolutely could happen. So I don't know. Don't leak the strat. Guys. Do you really think that what I'm doing right now is leaking anything that not any of the World Championship competitors is aware of? There's 25 people at Worlds. They know that this happened, okay? I'm not leaking shit. I'm telling you guys this, but you're not playing at Worlds. Everyone who's playing at Worlds is aware that this deck is a thing, and everyone is also aware that Andres Torres played this deck. All right, this is not a crazy leak or anything like that. I know how Yu-Gi-Oh players prepare for the World Championship. Okay, they are not unaware of this. This deck is good. This deck is unironically good. If it goes first, it cooks. If it goes second, it cooks every sort of mid-range deck in the format. So I think that there is, I don't know if it's Andres Torres who's going to play this, but this is absolutely something that we could expect at the World Championship. And so ultimately, where exactly are players going to land with the ceiling in Rolad? I don't know. If I had to guess, I would say the most likely is actually somewhere in the middle. Like this, I think makes a lot of sense for the World Championship, because I think with this deck, your ceiling is high enough going first that you will beat like some combo piles. Even if they have strong pushes, you can still beat that. But your deck is like, because here's the thing, right? Against this deck, the Mold Charmies are going to resolve, right? It doesn't even play Ash to begin with because it's a 60 card pile. There's no Called by Legal. The Mold Charmies will resolve against this deck. And I actually also think that there's a realistic chance that we will also see Mold Charmy Meowls being played at the World Championship. It has solid Mold Charmy compromises, but the mirror matches, like the combo versus combo matchups, are pretty rough with decks like these. I mean, it has good pushes, but if your opponent makes a board with Great Purification, Griffin Rider, and Ilya Sylvia, like, it doesn't matter how good your pushes are, you're not breaking that. So yeah, like, the thing is, like, basically, if we compare the two decks one by one, this deck is good going first and decent going second as well, because it has a higher chance of drawing Charmies, right? That's why I think that people might gravitate towards this deck, is because it's just more likely to draw and resolve a Charmy going second. And this deck is just made to exploit lower ceiling. So essentially, it's a matter of prediction. It's a matter of predicting the World Championship format, which luckily this year, it's not my job, it's the player's job to predict exactly what people are going to do. But realistically, if you think the format is Cool Tune, Branded, and something like Sky Striker, then you play this deck that's on the screen right now. Then you absolutely play this deck. If you think players are more likely to play stuff like this deck itself, Elf Notes, or whatever else, right? If combo decks, basically, higher ceiling. If you think people are going to go higher ceiling, then you would rather play something like this. because this has a higher chance of drawing Charmies going second. It has a more balanced approach to going second in general. And it's also really balanced for going first. Like you still make strong boards. You don't auto win with the boards, but they're good enough where like you do that, right? So yeah, that's how I think. And if you predict that no one is going to play stuff like this, if you think no one is going to play really high ceiling stuff because everyone is afraid of Charmies if they can't ash them or ash them less often, then you could bring something like this, in my opinion. This is something you only play this if you predict that people are not going to play combo piles, which I don't know if you can really make that prediction with confidence. I think if you could confidently say, hey, there's not going to be combo piles at Worlds, then this is a completely fine deck to play. So yeah. And so that's how I feel about Rolad at the World Championship. I think Rolad is going to be there 100%. Rolad is going to be there. So yeah. But I don't know exactly how Rolad is going to be there. Is how I feel about it. And then another deck we absolutely have to talk about is the deck that won the NAWCQ, and that is Sky Striker. This deck is pretty much entirely legal at the World Championship, and there's even two things that really benefit this deck. Droll and Lockbird is limited, which is probably the best non-engine in Sky Striker. And Ash is also semi-limited, which is another really good card against this deck. The question is anyone going to be willing to commit to playing Sky Striker at the World Championship? Because there's a couple of things. Sky Striker, as much as people think it's a really strong deck, it has the same issue that I talked about with branded Rolad. If your opponent is really good, they can basically beat every Sky Striker board. Like, a Sky Striker never makes a board that just wins you the game. And if your opponent plays really well, maneuvers really well, especially with a high ceiling deck like the Mitsurugi Azamina Rolad pile we just looked at, it's going to be hard. It's going to be really hard. So I think it's a risky call to play Sky Striker, but it has a phenomenal Cool Tune matchup. It has a phenomenal Cool Tune matchup if played properly. But once again, if the Cool Tune player is really good, essentially every matchup gets harder if you're playing at the World Championship, because you don't expect your opponent to make mistakes. And if your opponent doesn't make mistakes, if both Yu-Gi-Oh players play perfectly, then you need some kind of unfair stuff to skill gap your opponent, or not skill gap because you're both at the same skill, but if your opponent is really good, you want ignorant stuff, is what I'm trying to say. Like, you want something that just says, I don't care how good you are, I win. Right? You want like, here's my board, I don't care how good you are, you don't break it. And Sky Striker doesn't have this. It doesn't have this going first, it doesn't have this going second. Like, if you go second with Sky Striker, you will have to break the board, and you will have to play well, and your opponent will have to make not perfect decisions, essentially, right? And I think that is like a factor that is very like deterring for both Sky Striker and actually also for like pure branded or pure Rolad at the World Championship. So even though I think in a theoretical world, these decks are really well positioned into the format. Like, if you just look at the decks and you ignore the players piloting them, I would tell you, yeah, Sky Striker is great, Branded is great, Rolad is great in this kind of format. If it was a regionals or if it was a YCS, if you play against average players, these decks are going to be, I think, the best decks in the format. So for the World Celebrations events and stuff like that, I think decks like Sky Striker, decks like Pure Branded, decks like Pure Rolad are going to be phenomenal. But if you take the players at the World Championship into account, where they're going to be the best in the world, they're going to exploit any little mistake you make. If you mismanage your resources with Sky Striker, if you use your interruptions not careful, they're just going to run you over. I think that is a realistic concern. Now, I still think that these decks are going to be good for Worlds, but there is, like, they're not just straight up the best decks, I think. Yeah. They won't make mistakes of their own. Yes, right. That is true. Like and that's why they're still good. Like I do expect the players at the World Championship to be capable of piloting Sky Striker super well. But the problem is really that decks like the one we just looked at, the decks like this one are possible, right? And these decks, honestly, if you go first with Sky Striker against this, first of all, if you go second against this deck, you lose pretty much with Sky Striker because you're not breaking that board. Not against a world's caliber player. You're not breaking that board. The things that have to happen for Sky Striker to win against this deck going second include like 5 mistakes while making your board and then 5 more mistakes while they're breaking your board, which does happen if you play regionals or YCSs sometimes, but it's not going to happen at Worlds. They're not going to misplay that hard for you to lose against this deck. Or yeah, I mean, of course they can always break, but then it doesn't matter what you play. So yeah, that's the thing. Also, this deck can search Droll and Lockbird going first, which is another issue. Zena, they can send it with Zena and add it back with Firewall if they know you're playing Sky Striker, which that's another thing at the World Championship because there's only 26 players or 27 players. After like 2 rounds, everyone knows all the decks. So if they know you're playing Sky Striker, they know they go first, they just go, yeah, I'll send Droll for Zena and add it back with Firewall, and that's not even like, you don't even have to really go out of your way to do that. So you're not beating this deck going second with Sky Striker. And so I think the thing is, this deck might not even see that much play at the World Championship. I don't know that. But the problem is the players also don't know that. So are there really going to be people who will pick Sky Striker knowing that this deck could be played at Worlds is my question, right? And I'm gonna be honest with you, I don't think if I would. I feel like Torres showing this is a crazy bait. Maybe, dude, maybe, I don't know. That's why it's so fun. That's why it's so fun to be the watcher this time around. I'm not actually, I don't have to make this decision. It's a hard decision. I'm not gonna lie. This World Championship, it's like we talked about earlier before we even started the Worlds discussion. Modern Yu-Gi-Oh is so much about picking the right deck in the right spot, because otherwise you can just get FTK'd. And like the actual gameplay is way less important at the moment than picking the right deck, picking the right non-engine. And so it's an incredibly difficult decision for the most important tournament ever, right? For the World Championships. It's incredibly difficult to make that call of what is everyone else going to do with these informations and what am I going to do to exploit that? Because the thing is, at the level that people are at the World Championship, you need to be a step ahead. If someone else is one step ahead and they pick the right deck to beat yours, then you're cooked. Because you're not going to be able to skill diff these players. And I mean, of course, like, people are still going to make mistakes at Worlds. I'm not trying to, like, you know, the Worlds is an event with incredible amounts of pressure where not everyone is going to play perfectly, but it is still the highest level of competition you're going to get. So you're going to have to expect your opponent to play well. Like, you cannot bank on it. Mistakes are still going to happen, but you just can't expect it. So it's a very, very interesting format. And honestly, maybe the key to winning this World Championship is finding the best middle ground, is finding the deck that is good enough to beat the quote unquote lower ceiling decks like Sky Striker, Brandon, and Rolad, but still be good enough against these piles. Like somewhere in the middle, if you can find that kind of is good against both, I think that could be it. And here's the thing, maybe that's Cool Tune. Maybe that's Cool Tune, because a really, really well played Cool Tune is not that bad against Sky Striker if you play it perfectly. Or something like that. I don't know. Maybe Cool Tune is that. It could be. 50 cards. That's funny. It'd be funny if the solution ended up being, this is the 40 card decks, this is the 60 card decks, and the solution just happens to be 50. That'd be very funny. But no, I wasn't referring to the deck size. I was referring to the strategy, right? Well, yeah. If I had to predict the meta shaping strategies at Worlds, I think are gonna be Rolad, are gonna be Branded, are gonna be probably Cool Tune, and like, is Striker really? I don't know if Striker is. I probably Sky Striker is the fourth, but the fourth could also just be reserved to like whatever someone finds that is a good solution into this triangle thing, right? The Medius decks. Here's the thing, Medius. Yeah, Elf Notes could also be here. Like Elf Note, maybe it's Elf Note. Let's think about Elf Notes. The deck that won YCS Montreal. Where's that? YCS Montreal. This is entirely legal. Yeah, this has to be considered. Yeah, you're right. This absolutely has to be considered. So how does this deck match up into the other decks in the format? I think this deck is very strong against low ceiling Rolad. This deck is very strong against, I think it's good against Branded. It doesn't really want to go up against this, I feel, because it's still scary. You have a higher chance of drawing Charmies in this deck, so technically you're fine. But this deck still plays Charmies, right? It's not like it doesn't. There's still 6 Charmies in the 60 card deck, so they still will draw Charmies. And if they Charmy, you're like the Elf Note half board. The Elf Note half board is really, really good against like lower ceiling decks, but this deck shits on the Elf Note half board, I think. Oops. Like this deck is really, really good against the Elf Note half board. The Synchro 11 isn't legal. Which one? Oh, this one. Yeah, that's fine. Honestly, I think at the World Championship, Elf Nodes should play Cyframe Lord Omega. As much as I hate the card, and as much as I said I would like it to get banned, I think at Worlds, when you play against the highest level of competition, just FTK them. It's safer. It's safer. You don't want to sit across from someone who plays a deck like this and leave them with the tools to break your board. Yeah, Psychic and Punisher is not banned, but it's not about like maybe you don't even play the Ecclesia with the Fallen and the Virtuous package, but you just play Cypher Lord Omega, I think. How good is Contact C against Rollat? Not great. Contact C is just an answer to Cool Tune, I think, mainly. They can just tribute this for any ritual summon as well. I don't think this is good. They can even sometimes, I mean, depending on the version, they just link it off. So it's not great. Yeah, I think Elf Note is actually strong. I think Elf Note is strong. I was thinking about Elf Note from the OCG perspective, where it's like, well, in the OCG it's the best deck, but it doesn't have Baron anymore. But I mean, that still leaves them with the TCG version of Elf Note, which is still pretty damn good, right? Yeah. This deck is probably better than Striker for Worlds. I think it's so for Rolad, it's Rolad variations. I don't know. If I had to pick one that I would predict to be the best, it's probably Rolad Azamina. In some way, shape, or form. I don't know if players will go all the way to 60. Because yeah, this is the same dynamic that I alluded to earlier. If you think that the format is Cool Tune and Branded and Sky Striker, then you just pick this, I think. But I don't think, like, it's funny because I just said Elf Note doesn't want to play against this, but I think this also doesn't want to play against Elf Note because they're both basically just really high ceiling combo decks that have the capacity to FTK each other. And it's like at the level of the World Championship, you are basically flipping a coin if these two go up against each other. I think. I don't know. I feel like there's only two ways it can go. either the player going first pulls off the combo and wins on the spot, or the player going second has a Molcharmi or a Droll, which forces the opponent to end on a half board, which then the player going second is more than likely to win. But then we could see some good games out of it. But for the most part, it's just like, if there's no Charmy involved, you go first, you win. Most of the time with these two decks, right? And so it's basically this dynamic where the Rolat Azamina piles and the Elf Node piles, they're trying to dodge each other, right? Like if you knew that everyone else at Worlds was playing a more lower ceiling deck, then you would instantly pick one of these decks. You'd be like, yeah, I'll play this, no questions asked, 100%. And you'll probably win the event if that's the case. But the thing is that everyone, like basically everyone wants to exploit the lower ceiling decks. So how many are actually going to do it? And then, because then all of a sudden, if everyone expects the lower ceiling and everyone plays the higher ceiling, then what you have to end up playing is a whole bunch of combo mirrors and maybe some cool tunes because people play hand traps for the combo decks. And then you're not going to have a great time, right? So it's really, this World Championship really encapsulates this whole triangle that we were talking about with this whole combo midrange discussion, where like combo and midrange are not really good terms to describe modern Yu-Gi-Oh decks. It's really about like, what is your deck trying to do, right? Some decks are trying to win with very high ceiling. Some decks are trying to win with control and lower ceiling. And other decks are trying to win by not letting the opponent realize their ceiling by just playing a bunch of hand traps, right? So it's like, here we have Rolat, Azamina, Mitsurugi, and Elf Nodes. Here we have Branded and Sky Striker and pure Rolat. And here we have Cool Tune. And it's a cycle. It's essentially like it's a glorified like rock paper scissors in a way that is happening, and it's really difficult to say. It's basically just who gets it right, who gets the prediction right on which decks are going to be more popular. And also in a way there is luck involved here, because the reality is probably going to be that all three strategies are going to be present at Worlds. Just do you run into them or not, right? Like, I mean, there's 100% if you play this deck at Worlds, there's a chance that you run into Elf Nodes round 1, or you never run into Elf Nodes all day. Both could happen, 100%. Better rock, paper, scissors than a coin flip? If that's a massive improvement, that's true, I guess. Even though in rock, paper, scissors, you also have a 50% win rate. Because if you hit the same thing, you have to go again. So it's kind of the same, actually. Like with these decks, right? If you play Cool Tune and you hit Cool Tune, which is the same of yours, then you still have a 50-50. So it's not really, it's actually not different. On second thought, Elf Nodes with high ceiling and greater chance to seize Charmies is better. I mean, Elf Nodes did win the recent YCS, so you can make this is basically the most up to date version of this that we have, where Elf Node did win. And Elf Node really, even though it wasn't the most represented in top 32, Elf Node has experienced a lot of growth in the last couple of weeks. Like Elf Nodes was really popping off, whereas Cool Tune was far more dominant at the NAWCQ and EUWCQ. Cool Tune has declined and Elf Node has gone up. And Light and Darkness Ritual piles have also gone up. So I think at the moment, at least in the TCG, there is a tendency towards the higher ceiling. There is a tendency to the combo decks, and I wonder if it's going to be the same at Worlds, because that's another thing. That's another thing with the where am I? With the Worlds ban list. I think there is a tendency for the Worlds format to be closer to the TCG format than OCG format, right? Because we just spent some time looking at all the TCG decks and how most of them are kind of similar at the World Championships, right? Most of these decks barely change. It's a different story if we look at the OCG metagame. Because the OCG at this point is a whole different beast. And this, by the way, in case anyone is wondering, I think this is the reason why OCG players haven't been doing so well at the World Championship in recent years, is because their format is just too far gone, dude. This has been happening over the last couple of years, where the OCG ban list is is honestly kind of whack, and the power level of these decks in the OCG is so obscene that the World Championship format is just a completely different game for them. Like, the TCG players just go there and be like, okay, yeah, how do I replace 2 Rotaries and a Cool Tune Synchro for my Cool Tune deck? But the decks I'm playing against are still somewhat similar. You know, it's still like the Elf Note deck is entirely legal. The Rolat decks are almost entirely legal. Cool Tune is like, I mean, there's a 3-card difference, but it plays the exact same way. And the OCG is like, dude, this is what look at what these decks are doing different shit than what they're doing in the TCG or at Worlds. Like, they have to basically, not only do they have to change their decks, but they have to learn a completely different dynamic, essentially, right? And also, I think it's going to be crazy because they might have fun for the first time ever, but I don't know if they're necessarily going to be winning. That was a joke, but also not really. But the thing is, this deck, Toon, is dominating the OCG at the moment, together with Elf Notes, which is not like, the Elf Notes is viable, which I think is why I think OCG players, I think, are the most likely to play Elf Note or just Cool Tune. I would be kind of surprised if we saw a deck. Essentially, there's 4 decks that I think the OCG players are likely to play. Number 1, Elf Notes. Just take out the new cards. The Elf Note deck still plays relatively similar. It's just way less broken, but it still is Elf Notes. Like, they're still going to be, they're going to have to learn some different lines and stuff, but it's still Elf Notes. So I think they're likely to play Elf Notes. I think they're also likely to play Cool Tune, because that deck, like, this is the closest deck that they have that is just playable like this at Worlds, right? This is the one deck where the OCG already has some experience playing with 1 Rotary, playing with 2 Cool Tune Synchro. They already know this deck in this form. The only thing that they have to cut from this deck is the new Blue Eyes thing that searches Rotary, and then they're good to go, right? So this deck, I think, is something that the OCG players are actually going to be more familiar with than the TCG players, right? This is essentially the best thing that they can do if they just want to play a deck that's as close as possible to the OCG version of the deck, right? The new Dominus Girl also, but that just came out. It's not going to be that hard to just go back and remove that from your deck, because that's like out for a week or something, or 2 weeks. So I think Cool Tune and Elf Note are the most likely decks for OCG players to pick. The other option would be like Rolad mid-range stuff. I think that's something that is like somewhat popular in the OCG still, and that was a deck for them for a long time. So I could see them playing that a little bit, or Sky Striker. And Sky Striker mainly because it's basically completely unchanged, and some players really like it over there. I just don't know the players that qualified if they are Sky Striker enjoyers or not. Because I think, for example, someone who qualified with Elf Note and is more of a combo player in the OCG, I would think that they probably won't pick Sky Striker. They probably wouldn't pick Sky Striker. We can take a quick look at this. If I find Japan Championships here, the 5 players that qualified from this, they qualified with Toon, Tri-Brigade Toon, Malice, and Cool Tune. Those are the decks that the 5 Japanese representatives this year qualified with. I'm gonna be honest with you, the most natural thing for a Toon player to switch to is Cool Tune. It is just Cool Tune, because those decks are essentially, like, Toon is just, I think it's like a reskin of Cool Tune. 90%. Like, just look at your opponent's hand, figure out how to stop them from playing, negate 2 of their cards in the process, and just do that, right? And so I think it's not unlikely that the pure Toon players are just going to go to Cool Tune. And then also Kuki, who is, by the way, this is your 2019 world champion, who won Worlds with Salamangreat in 2019. Which was the last time the OCG has won the World Championship, which was 7 years ago at this point. To be fair, there was no World Championship in 2020, 2021, and 2022. But still, it was the last time they won. the World Championship in 2019 was him. And he qualified with Cool Tune. So I think the most natural thing would be to play Cool Tune again and just replace the 3 Blue Eyes cards and call it a day, right? The Malice Duelist is the one, the black box basically, where we don't know what's going to come out of this box. We don't know what they're going to play because it's not going to be Malice. There's no way. This is the probably the only player at the World Championship whose deck is like, I mean, the Toon players too, because the cards are just not legal, but this deck is just dead at Worlds. So they have to find something else. They have to find, and the Toon players too, they have to find something else. So we'll see. I don't know what the most natural replacements for Malice would be. Maybe Elf Notes. But yeah. So this is why I'm saying, I think for the OCG players, it's the most likely that they would gravitate towards Cool Tune or Elf Note. I think. I don't really see any one of these going like, yeah, I qualified with Toons. Let me go play Sky Striker at Worlds. That's just not really, in my head, that doesn't really make sense. Because if they thought Sky Striker was like a good approach, then they probably would have played it for the Japan Championships, because they could. It was a viable deck, and they didn't. So I don't know. It's possible, but I would just not expect it. Okay, so for the World Championship, those are my top 4 predictions. I think Roulette, Azamina, honestly, probably Branded over Elf Note. These are the decks that I expect the most of. Probably, but not in this order, probably. Maybe, maybe this order? I really don't know if Cool Tune is going to be the most popular deck, though. Do you guys think Cool Tune is going to be the most popular deck? Probably not. Yes? No? I don't know. It's a hard prediction to make. Elf Note all day. Here's the thing. I could see all of these 4 decks being like the most popular deck, and I wouldn't think it was crazy. Because at the end of the day, what does most popular deck mean at Worlds? It could be 8 people. Literally. If the format is relatively spread out between all of these, then like one deck having 8 or 9 players could already be the most represented deck. And I could see 8 players bringing Cool Tune. Easily. I could also see 8 players bringing Branded, or 8 players bring Elf Note, or 8 players bring Roulette. That could happen. I don't know if it's Branded, because Branded has a counter in Roulette, but I don't know. What is a surprise deck we could see at the World Championships? Fairy Tail, Doomsday. Now, I guess that's an interesting thing to talk about before we talk about the individual players. What is a deck that we could see at Worlds that we haven't talked about yet, that we like? What is something? I think Invoked is a deck that we can talk about real quick, because of course Danilo qualified with Invoked. There's one thing, yeah, no, I could see Invoked. I could definitely see Invoked show up. I don't know. Here's the thing. The players definitely tested this deck. I can guarantee you this. Like someone like Danilo or all the other ones, because after the European Championship, all eyes were on this deck. And I'm looking at this deck right now, and I think it just has no hits at the World Championship. Nothing, right? Super Poly is at 2, right? Sure. Super Poly is at 2, which is a good card in this deck, but you can live with that. So yeah. This deck is not nice into Fuwa. It is not nice into Fuwa, and Fuwa is more likely to resolve. You know, you do lose 1 Cult by 1 Ash going into the World Championship, so it's more likely you get Fuwa'd. Yeah, maybe that's enough argument for players to not play it. But maybe you can also make good half boards by just making like the Oceanus and just go and pass. I don't know. No Mixuzia too. I mean, this deck doesn't play Mixuzia. This list, the one that top Euros didn't even play it, so you can play it, but you don't need it, which has been proven already. So, but yeah, this is a deck that we could see. What else is a deck that we could see? Fairy Tail. Fairy Tail, I think, is full power. besides Mixuzia, but the deck was already playable without Mixuzia, so I think it's fine. No Genia? I think that's fine. I just think this deck is not good, is my issue with it. I just think this deck is not good. Not like in a vacuum. In a vacuum, it's a very capable deck. It makes strong boards and everything, but I just think this deck it just doesn't do anything better than the other decks in the format. Like, what does this deck do that other decks can't do? Like, it doesn't have the greatest lines into Charmies. It doesn't have more broken end boards than Elf Node or the Rollout piles. I don't really see what it does that really is special. Into Charmies, it's great. How is it great into Charmies? Like, what are you ending on? What are you ending on that's realistically going to stop the best players in the world, potentially on combo decks, from completely dissecting you under Fuwa? Like, you're gonna have like a Luna and maybe Fairy Tail Snow access somehow, or like, and every interaction you add to the board gives an additional card. I don't know. I really don't think it's that good into Charmies. Weaver, Luna, Quick Play, Ball, and Snow. Right. Which requires you to give how many draws into the Charmies? I don't know if that holds up. It depends on what deck who draws into. Yeah, I don't know if that holds, dude. I really don't think that holds. If your opponent has 7 cards and they are on this, it does not hold. There's no way. It might not even hold against Elf Node or Rollout or Branded. Like that I don't think it works. So yeah, I don't really see it. And here's the thing, I don't really see on the other side, I don't see the advantage for doing it. Right? Like, I don't see the reason to take that risk to play a deck like this. Like, is it significantly better going second at pushing into boards? I don't think so. Does it make more powerful boards than other decks in the format? I don't think so either. Like, I just don't see a reason. It's not like the deck sucks. I just think it's bad in comparison. I could see Archmage. Genuinely, I think Archmage is a very, very powerful deck, especially into Fuwa. I think the fact that you can just do the Elf Node, the Archmage combo under Fuwa is very, very strong. I just don't know if the board breaker approach is the right thing to do at the World Championship, right? Like, I think Archmage is a great deck in a format where you can just play board breakers, like this version right here, where you make use of the fact that your field spell can just discard stuff like Lightning Storm or Evenly Matched or whatever when you go first. So I think Archmage could be an option for that, but I don't know if I would reliably, like, once again, it's the same thing we talked about earlier. I think in a vacuum, if you just look at the decks, I think a deck like this looks viable when you have cards like Lightning Storm and Evenly. But in reality, if you consider the players piloting the decks, I think it's going to be a lot harder. But this is a good deck against something like Sky Striker as well, which is another reason why I think it's scary to play Striker, because this is something that people might end up playing. No Shade kind of removes power patrons. I don't know. I've played against this deck a bunch, and I didn't feel like the Shade was that important. Like, sure, they play a copy and they search it sometimes, but I think this deck is viable without it. I think this deck is okay without Shade the power page, Shade the Obscure. I don't think it's that necessary. I just think, basically, if I had to compare Archmage and Elf Nodes, I actually think that Archmage is better into Fuwa. I mean, it's better into Fuwa, worse into Purulia. And for Elf Nodes, I think it's the other way around. Like, Fuwa can hit it a little bit harder sometimes, but like Purulia, you don't really care that much about. And Purulia is still fine, but you give 1 or 2 draws and still do the full thing. I think Elf Node's really good into Fuwa. It's just like, both of these decks, I've played against both of these decks and I've charmied both of these decks, and it felt like the half board that they made was still really, really broken no matter which charmy I had. Like, in Archmage's case, if you Fuwa them, they just summon a bunch of guys from hand, draw some cards, have interaction from them on your turn, and they can fuse all the stuff they want to fuse on your turn. Like they just like go Archmage Power Patron, fuse into one of these two on your turn. They can use the effect of Non Finito as well to fuse into the other one on your turn. Like it's just really, really good into Charmies. And it's the same thing with Elf Nodes. Both of these decks are really strong into Charmies. Which is, I mean, the natural stage of the power creep that we're in right now, which is that the combo decks are now getting better again into the non-engine that people are playing. So yeah, they're not even reliably good anymore. I find it hard to imagine that we will really see other decks. Like maybe someone picks Doom Z, but what would be the reason to play Doom Z over Elf Nodes? I don't really see it. Maybe because it plays better into half boards. Like okay, maybe Doom Z is valid because you get to play 40 cards with 6 more Charmies, and Doom Z is probably the best Media's lore deck at going second, right? Because the cards just have bonus effects when you play into a board. They trigger when destroyed and stuff like that. So it's harder to interact with Doom Z when it plays into a board, and it just has a more natural way to break boards, right? So maybe that is a reason for people to consider Doom Z. Doom Z loses to Rolad. Doom Z does lose to Rolad pretty hard, yeah. Definitely. What would you bring if you were participating? Mid-range Rolad, I assume. I don't know. My instinct would be, I can't say that for certain, because if I qualified for Worlds, I would have spent the last month or two testing nonstop, pretty much. So I'm not at the point where I would be if I had prepared. So I didn't do that because I didn't qualify. So I can't tell you for sure what my result would have been. But my tendency would have been, I would like to play Branded or Rolad or Sky Striker. And I can tell you, it probably would have gone this way. I would have started testing with those decks, and I would have noticed a lot of flaws in them when I go up against combo decks. And then I would have really had to make that prediction. Do I think people are going to play combo decks at this World Championship? And if the answer is yes, I don't think I could have played those decks. As much as it pains me to say it, I think with the more I'm thinking about it, the more I'm thinking about how strong Elf Notes is for this tournament, how strong this pile is for this tournament. I don't think that I would have played something like Sky Striker. I just don't think I could have brought myself to it. I probably wouldn't have played a combo deck myself, because I think if I'm expecting these decks, I wouldn't want to play the mirror match either. That's not something I would want to do. So I would have probably tried to find something somewhere in the middle, something that has a powerful enough end board to withstand these decks, but still like more room for, I don't know what the right word. I don't even know if it exists. I would not have played Cool Tune, I don't think. Although at this level, I think Cool Tune is fine. I just don't, I don't hate Cool Tune, but I also don't think the Cool Tune gameplay with just like throwing hand traps at your opponent is very tempting. At the same time, I think when you go to the World Championship, you kind of have to say goodbye to the idea of just skill gapping your opponents. Of like saying like, yeah, well, I don't want to play. Because a genuine reason why I didn't want to play Cool Tune at the European Championship was because I didn't want to play the hand trap minigame when I am capable of outplaying my opponent. Because I don't think Cool Tune does that. I don't think Cool Tune very often outplays your opponent. You just like, especially going second, you just see if your hand traps are good enough. And I think at Worlds, that's maybe okay, because you can't expect to be smarter or better than all of your opponents. At Worlds, you have to expect people to be just as good as you are. So, yeah. Draco Tail is not great. Does Josh not trust Ray enough? No, I don't. For Worlds, I don't think I do. I think it's possible that Sky Striker is played and also tops. It definitely works if people play enough Cool Tune. But that's the problem with Sky Striker. It's the only deck that Sky Striker is really good against out of all of the decks we've talked about so far is Cool Tune. And even when you face Cool Tune at Worlds, you're facing the best players in the world on Cool Tune, which is still a little bit harder. Sky Striker is not favored against Branded. Sky Striker is not favored against Rolad. Sky Striker is not favored against Elf Node, and it's not favored against Mitsurugi, Azamina, whatever piles. So it's like, if you pick Sky Striker for this tournament, you have to expect to fight an uphill battle against the best players in the world, which I don't think is great. I don't think it's great. I think Sky Striker was a much better call last year, actually, when it got top 4, because it was farming Vanquish Soul. And that's why it was such a genius call last time, is because you just farmed Vanquish Soul naturally. There wasn't that much that the people could do to exploit it. It wasn't like, you know, Vanquish Soul just wasn't equipped with the tools to auto win against Sky Striker. So it was a really cool call last year, but it was honestly, it was unfortunate that that Roselle ran into Lunalight, because Lunalight was not really a deck to be expected last year. I mean, it was a call by Tom, so it was like the two meta calls met each other in the top 4, and unfortunately Lunalight also had a good matchup into Sky Striker, right, for Roselle. Roselle wins the YC the Worlds if she plays Hamp, yeah, because she won game 1 as well, which was kind of crazy. Could Blitzclick be a decent call? Could Blitzclick be a decent call? Yes and no. The reason why I think Blitzclick could be good here is that it basically ignores the Charmies most of the time. I think that is good about it. I think it also is relatively flexible with how you build it. There's a couple of things you can do to make it better in the matchups you want it to be better in. Like, it can't play hand traps, but it can also be played more as like a breaker approach. I think the sad truth about Blitzclick is that I think it's too fair. I think it's too fair for what we're expecting the format to be. When you qualified for TCG Worlds, how did you prepare? Were you preparing with all players that qualified from EU together, or each prepared separately? It depended on the year. In 2019, I tested with Herman and Jonas Koschel, who were both also qualified for Worlds, because I just figured it would give me more benefit to share ideas with people and get feedback on it and stuff like that. I thought that was good. And it ended up being a good year. I think we all 3 of us we ended up playing Thunder Dragon, and Herman ended up making top 8, and Jonas and myself, we both ended up going 3-2, which is good in the grand scheme, like in the context of the World Championship. I think we ended up 9th and 10th place because of tiebreakers, and it was top 8. So it was like Herman got top 8, and Jonas and myself, we ended up being 9th and 10th, or 10th and 11th. I don't remember exactly, but it was quite close. And in 2018, I prepared mostly by myself. Opinion on Memento? Memento is probably not going to be played at Worlds. It wouldn't be terrible, but once again, I think at this point we just have, like, that's the thing, right? We're looking at it from the TCG perspective here. Most of these decks that we looked at from the TCG format, they barely change. So Worlds, for the most part, is current TCG format minus Called By, -1 Ash, -1 Droll, -1 Impulse. And at the end of the day, that means that most of the decks that are good in TCG right now are still good at Worlds. So we are essentially just playing... This year, the World Championship is going to be very close to the TCG, like it's always been over the last 2 or 3 years, which is why I think TCG is doing so much better than OCG. But, you know, Earth Machine FTK is genuinely an idea. Yeah, okay, I mean, that's another thing, right? If this is something that people play, where the only non-engine going second is Molcharmies, you could genuinely exploit that with an actual FTK, right? Where, like, if you get Charmied, you just go, right? You just go. So it could happen. That's the thing, right? The players who are participating in the World Championships are gonna have so much deeper of an understanding of the format because they play so much more. They make so much more. They put in so much more time than we do. So it's possible that someone finds something that we didn't even talk about. That just works, right? That just works. And you know whether to go or not since it's 60 and that's public knowledge. Yeah, if you see 60 cards and you get Charming, you just go. Yeah. I think that works. You know, there's always room for surprises at Worlds, but at the end of the day, I think like 95% of the format is probably going to revolve around the decks we discussed right now. I could see 1 or 2 players maybe coming up with something completely different, maybe 3, but for the most part, I expect over 20 decks to be like Rollout Variations, Elf Note, maybe Art Mage, Branded, maybe Sky Striker, Full Tune, right? Who do you have winning, right? That's the next thing I wanted to talk about. Let me close some of these deck tabs. But the next thing, we've talked about the decks, but let's talk about who is participating at Worlds this year and who is going to end up winning. Let me find. I have a lot of tabs open for today's discussions. Let me try and find that real quick. Trading card game duelists. All right. Now, like I said, I'm not going to rank all of the duelists because I don't feel comfortable, like, especially when we would go towards the lower end of the ranking. I just don't see the value in telling people like, yeah, I think you are the worst player at the World Championship or you are bottom 3 or whatever. I'm just going to pick 4 players that I want to highlight who I think have a good chance of winning. And that's it. I think that's enough. I think we don't need to go any further. So there's a lot of interesting players at the World Championship this year. Most notably, we have 3 players at Worlds this year who have been previous World Champions. We've obviously got Julian, who won last year, naturally, being re-invited. But we also have Kugi Kusaka, who was your 2019 World Champion with Salamangreat. And we have Wang Chiaching, who is the 2018 World Champion with, I think it was Trickstar in 2018. Most notably also, when he came back to the World Championship in 2019, he ended 2nd place. So, 1st place in 2018, 2nd place in 2019, only losing to Kuki Kusaka, who's also at the World Championship again. So, I think all of these, I mean, here's the thing. First off, I think everyone here has a chance of winning the World Championship. All of these are strong players who qualified for Worlds, which is an incredibly hard thing to do. So, of course, yeah, of course, these players all have a chance of winning the World Championship. I'm just gonna highlight some of my favorites who I think have a good shot in this kind of format. I don't know. And the first one I want to showcase is Jib. I think Jib has been a very consistently performing player in the US, who's been putting in all the work that's been necessary. And essentially just where I'm coming from is with how much work Jib has been putting into regular YCSs and nationals and stuff like that. I can only imagine the amount of work that Jib is putting into the World Championship. So I think I'm gonna pick Jib as one of my 4 favorites to win. Yeah, that's my first favorite to win the World Championships is Jib. Or like I'm just trying to predict like the top 4. I don't know who's gonna end up winning ultimately, but I'm just picking my top 4 players. Who else do I think has a good chance? I think when I first started thinking about it, I thought Andres Torres, if Andres Torres just plays Branded, which he's been known for doing so long, I felt like he was going to have a good chance. The more I'm thinking about it now, though, and the more we talked about the decks now, I don't know if Branded is actually... I mean, it's definitely a good deck at Worlds. I don't know if it's the best deck by that far, because there's counters to it, and it's got rough matchups, and people are going to play really well. And I think if that's the case, Andres Torres probably will have to play a deck outside of his comfort zone. So I don't know if I want to pick Andres Torres. But maybe. What about our European representatives this year? I think Danilo is a strong pick. I think Danilo is definitely a strong pick. Similar reasons to Jib, actually, because I think Danilo has been putting in a lot of work and it's been paying off. He's been super consistent with different decks with across the season. Has topped multiple YCSs with Draco Tail and then qualified with Invoked out of all things. And honestly, the fact that Danilo qualified with Invoked is probably the reason why I think he's one of the people who I would predict to do really well, because he's proven that he's capable of making insane predictions like that. Because if you think about it, the World Championship qualifying points playoff is kind of similar to the World Championship in terms of how you prepare for it. Because it's also this super small competition with really good players where you really have to make good predictions as to what people are going to play and how do you exploit that and so on and so forth. And I really like the way Danilo did that at the European Championship, because I think he was like one of the few people who made like a crazy meta call and it ended up working. And so I think Danilo has shown that he's capable of doing that, which I think is why I'll pick Danilo. Because if he manages to do that again, then I think he has a very good chance at doing well. Maybe he just brings Invoked again and it works out again. Who knows? But I think now that people have Invoked on their radar, it's definitely going to be more difficult. Who else do I think? I mean, Julian is an obvious pick for similar reasons. I think he's also been putting in a lot of work and he's been performing insane. So I honestly think it would be, for the sake of just making the prediction accurate, I think it would be insane not to pick Julian again, because he's been putting in so much work recently. You know, got second at French Nationals, got second at YCS Montreal. He's so in, like, he feels so connected with the format. So I think Julian is probably just very favored to do well again. Yeah, I'll pick Julian. And once again, I want to emphasize that what we're talking about here is a very, very small nuance in quality. Like, I'm aware that all of these players are incredibly good players, and I don't want to step on anyone's toes, which is why I'm only picking 4 people and not ranking them all, because at some point it just gets really difficult to find. Like, I'm sure that all of these players have good chances of doing well. Yeah, I don't know. I would love to pick an OCG player as well. And like, it's interesting because some of these players, I'm not familiar with all of these players, as I'm familiar with most of the players from the TCG side, but I'm not as familiar with the players from the OCG side. The thing is, the few people I do know from the OCG have had very, very impressive results. For example, the 2 World Championships from 2018 and 2019. And I think that specifically the 2018 World Champion has a very good chance at doing well again, because he is actually one of the most experienced players with the pressure from the World Championship, because he won 2018, came back in 2019 as the reigning World Champion in a different format, still figured it out and got second place. So I think I'm gonna pick Wang Chia-Ching to do well again, because he's won it already and he got second the year after. I don't know, you just got to give it to him. I think he's shown, and like, here's the thing, he's here 8 years later qualifying again. I don't know, man. He topped in 2024 as well, apparently. Is someone, I didn't check that. I don't know. Did he top in 2024? He's just been doing so well, man. So I'm gonna pick him as my 4th. So that is my prediction on the top 4 players. We got someone from Asia. We got someone from we got 2 from NA actually, and 1 from Europe, who I picked as my favorites, just because I've just been impressed of what they've done in the past more than anything else, right? It's not that I think the other players can't do it as well, because I think they very well could. But I've just been very, very impressed with the performances of these players recently and also in previous World Championships.